Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Unknown Problems Podcast. I am Daniel Liberatore.
And I am Madison Lang. And the podcast you'll be listening to today is going to teach you a little something about the Aral Sea crisis.
Now, I'm sure most of you have no idea what the Aral Sea is, but that's what we're here for on the Unknown Problems Podcast.
So, a few facts about the Aral Sea before we get started here. The Aral Sea is located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which are both in Central Asia, and the Amu Darya and Syra Darya rivers that flow into the lake.
So, the Aral Sea actually used to be the fourth largest lake in the world back in the 1960s before this crisis occurred. It also had over 24 species of fish living in the lake, and with many wetlands and forests in the lake, or at least around the lake. And so the lake was very popular, which is crazy because if you see these pictures now, the pictures are night and day.
So, as we were researching, we wanted to share some information in a creative way instead of just throwing statistics at you because that can become very boring. So, in order to do so, we created a story that would be similar to someone who experienced the changes of the Aral Sea back in these times. So, in 1950, in Tastubek, which is in Uzbekistan, Adam was born. When Adam was a child, he used to play with his friends in the lake. His father worked as a fisherman on the sea, which as did a lot of the men back in that time. And his mother stayed at home and cared for him and the rest of their family, including his two sisters and one brother. Back in those days, the women usually didn't have many jobs, so they acted as a stay-at-home mom. The sea provided them with everything they could need: food, water, and fruitful land to live on, which sounds like a pretty nice childhood if you ask me.
Exactly. That actually reminds me of Lake Erie. I live right by Lake Erie, and my best friend actually has a house on the lake, so it was always a good time, especially during the summer, being able to go out on a boat or something. Just have fun out there. It's a good time. So back to the story. Then in the 1960s, they started to notice something about the lake, and it was beginning to shrink. But no one really thought too much about it. Adam continued on with his life and got married in 1971, making him 21 years old.
Then in 1972, Adam and his wife had their first child.
During this time, the health of the Aral Sea and the surrounding communities became pretty apparent.
So back in around the 1960s, 1970s, the Soviet Union started to override all the different countries in Central Asia. So the Soviet Union stormed in and took all the land by the Aral Sea to plant cotton, which is one of the main staples in Central Asia. They used the Aral Sea as a resource for their irrigation system, being that the lake was the fourth largest in the world, in order to keep the cotton growing.
So they used all this fertilizer to keep the crops healthy, which we'll later talk about it, but it had a devastating effect in the long run for the Aral Sea.
So years went by while the Soviet Union continued to harvest the cotton while also decreasing the health of the Aral Sea, which I can relate to this in a way because I'm from a really small town with a lot of farmland, and my grandparents own a farm, a lot of my uncles own farms too, and most of them have lakes on them, and there's not a lot of fish in those lakes because of all the fertilizer that runs off into those lakes and all the chemicals that they use to keep their crops healthy.
Right. So in 1979, Adam unfortunately lost his job because of the large number of fish that have died due to the lake decreasing. And this is where I'll actually start to talk. I was able to sit down with Professor Barry here at Walsh University, and she gave me a very interesting take on what actually went on as the lake decreased. And so she was explaining to me how all this fertilizer and all this pollution got into the lake. All that goes down towards the bottom of the lake. And so what happens is that as that water is going down, that the water is getting closer to the pollution that hasn't been touched in like years. And so as that water goes down towards the pollution, that means the water is getting more polluted, which means the fish in the water is getting, is intaking that water. So this is where many problems happen because all that pollution, all those fertilizers, all those chemicals are getting into the water, are getting into the fish that the people, live off of around there.
Yeah. So the depletion of the resources ended up causing poverty to spread in the surrounding areas and also causing families to migrate to other parts of the country to find new places to live. Like I said earlier, the lake provided all the communities food and water for them, and because because the health of the sea was decreasing, it also caused their resources to end up just kind of disappearing.
Yeah, so with all this migrating, Adam and his family decided to stay in Tazubek. Is that how you say it? Tastubek, thank you. And so they did this after hearing about, unfortunately, that there was human trafficking going on during these migrations. So these men would just take advantage, as all these people are moving away from the sea. They take advantage, and there's a lot of human trafficking going on during this time.
So Adam's wife and his child were soon forced into labor by the Soviet Union to work in the cotton fields because the amount of workers were decreasing because everyone was migrating. So instead of the men just doing the jobs, the women and the children also had to start working in the cotton fields.
So with this all going on, drinking water became very scarce and even contaminated. So all these people are drinking contaminated water. So especially we can relate to this with Flint, Michigan, in a big way, and how that can affect not only the economy but also in health, which will be included in the story.
So families, including Adam's, were becoming very sick. Adam's wife developed lung cancer due to the harsh chemicals that were spread over the crops and over the land. Dust storms were being created because of how much the lake was drying up. So where the lake dried up, all of the all the pollution and the sediment that was still there from the lake would get blown up, and all of those chemicals would be spread over the land. So also the food sources like fish were running low, even lower than before because of the Aral Sea dying.
So with all these things going on, we're going to do a quick fast forward to 1985. Adam started to hear rumors of biological warfare testing by the Soviet Union on an island in the middle of the Aral Sea called Renaissance Island.
So the Soviet Union ended up testing weapons which contained different deadly diseases that could potentially be used to wipe out entire populations. Some of those diseases were smallpox, the plague, and even anthrax. Back in these times, the biological warfare was a really scary thing to think about because it could just wipe out if they would drop it, it would just wipe out the entire populations.
Right, and this isn't the first time we hear about the Soviet Union involved with the Aral Sea and how they used the water for irrigation with the cotton. So this is the second time already we're seeing the Soviet Union kind of just coming in and doing what they want, not even acknowledging the environment side of things.
Yeah.
So with this whole biological warfare, weaponry, at first it was no big deal. It was in the middle of the huge, at the time, Aral Sea. But as the sea continued to shrink, the diseases could spread a lot easier because, as I was saying about the whole pollution and the water shrinking, it gets closer to the pollution. This is the same way. As the water shrinks, the same amount of those chemicals are staying there. The chemicals aren't shrinking, so which makes it much more dangerous.
Yeah. So when they were testing all these chemicals, the rainwater would also get contaminated. And a lot of the rain at that time was usually salvaged for drinking water. But because of the Aral Sea, and so now all their drinking water had potential to contain anything from like hepatitis to typhoid and other fatal diseases.
So one of those diseases, unfortunately, Adam's son at 13 years old developed a case of smallpox.
So medicine at this time in Uzbekistan was not very good and was very depleted due to the lack of resources during this time period. And of course, you know, some of them went to complain to the Soviet Union about about all these diseases and everyone getting sick, but they just didn't really care about it.
Yeah. So thankfully, in the mid 1990s, a few things started to look up. We see so much negativity here with the diseases and the crops, like all the economy, and just the fact that the Aral Sea is shrinking. Organizations, including the International Fund for the Aral Sea, the Interstate Council for the Aral Sea Basin, the Development and Environmental Programs for the United Nations, and also Madison's Sans Frontiers came in to help with the issues in the Aral Sea.
So Adam, being about 47 years old at this time, thought that only things could go up. So, because he saw the Aral Sea at its very worst when it started to shrink and split into two, and then ended up splitting into 4 separate bodies of water, and he was kind of right about that things were starting to go up.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I can add about Professor Berry, what she was saying. So obviously, the Aral Sea used to be the 4th largest lake in the world, and after it shrunk so much, obviously it's not going to be able to come back so quickly. And so what she was explaining to me how things are looking up in the fact that it stopped shrinking, it stopped decreasing, which is a great sign. Obviously, it won't be back to the size it was, at least for a long time. But yeah, so it's being explained how that the positivity here we're looking at is that the decreasing has stopped, which is a great sign. So Adam's wife and child got the medical assistance that they needed to help with the cancer and with the smallpox disease.
So life was for sure looking up for the years to come. But also one thing that I can add to this was a couple of years ago, my junior year of high school actually, I had to write a research paper, and my topic was nature. And like my junior English teacher said, "This is your topic, just go for it." So I had to find all these different articles about different things in nature. I had to come up with a very specific topic that I wanted to talk about. So I ended up talking about kind of how society, humans and our society have pretty much ruined nature, and we're kind of the cause of it. Mm-hmm. And how that no matter what we do to try to help it now, that it will just never be back to the way it used to be. And that actually really relates to the Aral Sea, because all of these organizations have been coming in trying to help, but they have the potential to help, but it'll just never be back to how it used to be. Because we hear all the time about the people cutting down trees, species going extinct, and it's all human error. Mm-hmm. So which, just like the Aral Sea, the Soviet Union, they were the ones that pretty much completely destroyed the Aral Sea with their chemical testings and their cotton harvesting and fertilizers.
Right. And I think that's a big thing, is that the Soviet Union really just came in and kind of just did their thing, and without any awareness to the environment, which is definitely something we can learn from, and I think we have learned from with all these environmental groups. Obviously, nothing's going to be perfect. It's always going to be a struggle. But I think that's a big lesson with all these crises and all these environmental struggles like there's so many now. With all the weather and the forest fires and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's definitely an awareness to it. I think just as a society, we need to be more aware to everything that's around us in the environment, especially. So
like Professor Barry was saying, how we're not really aware of things going on in other places, but like that's also other things you have to be aware of.
Exactly. Yep. And like I said, how there is awareness out there. And actually, in 2005 for the Aral Sea, there was a dam completed to help increase the water flow from the two rivers back into the sea, which is thankfully actually bringing some of the fish back.
So to kind of complete our story, even though Adam was older now and not being able to do as many things as he used to be able to do, he ended up getting a fishing job back in the Aral Sea, as well as many other men who stayed there with their families.
And there you go. That's the story. So obviously things are looking up for the Aral Sea. At least, in a way that it's not getting any worse, which is, I guess looking at the glass half full. So yeah.
So another question that has kind of come up was that actually me and Dan have been talking about were different challenges that these international organizations have been facing and what has kind of caused them not to make any further progress on the restoration of the Aral Sea and what can kind of be changed about that.
So to answer that question, I'm gonna go back to Professor Barry, and I might have mentioned it before how she was explaining that the Aral Sea is now has gotten better, but in a way where the water has stopped decreasing, which is a great sign. It'll take a while to increase, if it will ever increase, but she really dove into the fact that the water levels are now staying the same. There's no more. It won't be shrinking anymore anytime soon.
Yeah. So the Aral Sea ended up splitting into 4 separate bodies of water at one point. So the salinity of the water was at an all-time high due to all the pollution around the sea. And since the restoration of the sea had started, the salinity levels have gone down. So hence all the fish coming back. But since the water is generally still kind of salty, there have been some species of saltwater fish like flounder found in the sea, which the people of Kazakhstan kind of dislike. So that's one problem that could try to be fixed by these organizations.
And also the dam that was built in 2005 has been improving the water flow back into the southernmost part of the sea. So it's like a more plentiful part of the sea. And but the natives have been also saying that when the water flows it back into the sea, it kind of just evaporates, which can be a big problem. So what they might do and what they should be trying to do is to raise the dam to prevent large quantities of water to flow into the southern sea, keeping the northern sea in better health, or vice versa for that matter. To lower the dam, allowing more water to flow into the southern sea while maintaining a healthy level in the northern sea.
And then another big problem is, as mentioned earlier, all those dust storms. So the amounts of salt from the sea having a high salinity level. The salt has been blowing around the land, causing issues with the crops and the livestock. So all around the land is pretty salty. So the organizations could also try to come up with a program to restore the land's health, not only the sea, and that could be a pretty good place to start.
So overall, the people around the Aral Sea, the people that live there, the civilians that live there, that they call the Aral Sea their home, they still have hope, and for the restoration of the Aral Sea. Obviously, a lot of stuff went down there, and a big just environmental crisis happened. So, that's the Aral Sea crisis.
So we would like to take the time to thank Professor Barry here at Walsh University for sharing her knowledge of the Aral Sea crisis with us and for taking the time out of her day to talk with us about it.
And we'd also like to thank Walsh University for letting us use this podcast space. It's very, very nice and professional.
And then lastly, we would like to thank the Blue and Global Scholars Program for giving us the opportunity to dive into our cohort topic, which is water, throughout learning about different crises through the history of water.
And that was another episode of The Unknown Problems, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.